When zombies encounter sharks in the deep sea, who will come out on top? This is the mind-bending premise of the 1979 zombie film, a true trailblazer in the world of zombie movies, the Italian classic, Zombie. The story kicks off with a small boat drifting freely on the open sea. Concerned about disrupting the normal navigation of other vessels, a few Coast Guards immediately board the boat to investigate. However, to their astonishment, the boat is eerily empty, and the cabin is in disarray. One of the Coast Guards cautiously enters the cabin and discovers rotting, moldy food on the table, indicating that someone had been living on the boat. As he investigates further, he opens a nearby pile of clothes only to find a decomposed severed hand wrapped inside. Disgusted, before he can call for his colleagues, a zombie suddenly lunges out from a cabinet, tackling him and biting into his neck. The distant Coast Guards hear a gruesome scream, witnessing the zombie emerging from the cabin. Thinking it's just a regular person, the initial Coast Guard refrains from shooting and instead issues warnings, but the relentless zombie continues its menacing approach. Faced with the escalating threat, the Coast Guard makes a decisive move and pulls the trigger. The news of the Coast Guard's attack quickly reached headquarters. The authorities towed the small boat back to the shore for examination and discovered that its owner was Anne's father. However, when questioned by the police, Anne appeared bewildered. While acknowledging that the boat indeed belonged to her father, she explained that he had sailed it to a small island 3 months ago. She had no idea why the boat reappeared or where her father was now. Simultaneously, the forensic team was conducting an autopsy on the Coast Guard's body, unaware that a horrifying transformation was taking place. A dreadful disaster was on the verge of occurring. On the other side, Anne, determined to find her father, stealthily infiltrated the small boat under the cover of night, hoping to uncover useful clues. However, as she meticulously searched for information, a pair of large hands suddenly pulled her aside. It was none other than the journalist Peter. His motive was to find more material for his news coverage, and he succeeded in discovering a letter. Since their goals aligned, they decided to team up. And so, the two of them formed an alliance in their quest for answers. According to the contents of the letter, they learned that Anne's father was conducting research on a small island. So, early the next morning, they arrived at the dock to board a boat. However, when Captain Brian found out the destination was the small island, his expression immediately turned serious. He mentioned that the island was an ominous place. Despite their insistence on going, Brian reluctantly agreed to take them, with the condition that he wouldn't accompany them ashore. And so, the group set off on the small boat, unaware that the island was currently in the grip of a terrifying zombie virus. Anyone who died after being infected with the virus would immediately turn into a walking corpse. The people on the island couldn't escape. A doctor had traveled there with his wife, Menard, in search of a way to combat the zombie virus. While the natives considered it a curse, the doctor, driven by scientific belief, persisted in his research. Unfortunately, progress was slow, and the number of infected individuals continued to rise. On that same night, an unexpected incident occurred at the doctor's house. While Menard was taking a bath, a zombie suddenly appeared outside the window. Unaware of the danger, Menard continued with her routine. However, as she finished bathing and prepared to sleep, she heard unusual sounds outside the door. Menard sensed trouble and quickly hid in the room. Before she could close the door, a large hand reached in. After struggling to shut the door, the zombie forcefully broke through. Menard tried to defend herself using a cabinet, but the relentless zombie broke through the door and grabbed her by the hair. Slowly, it pulled her towards a broken wooden board, impaling her head on the protruding spikes. By the next day, Peter and his team, after a night of sailing, were nearing the waters where the small island was located. Brian's girlfriend, Susan, impressed by the scenery, decided to take a dive into the underwater world. Unfortunately, she quickly became the target of a shark. Although she managed to hide just in time, the coral reef held more than just the threat of a shark. A zombie emerged from the depths, catching Susan off guard. In the chaos, she grabbed a piece of coral, blocking the zombie's line of sight and narrowly escaping the danger. At this moment, the great white shark also arrived, but its target was the zombie. One is the ruler of the ocean, and the other is a bloodthirsty undead. A shark and a zombie clashed instantly. The zombie, accustomed to feasting on land animals, now had to change its taste preferences. It forcefully grabbed a large piece from the shark and eagerly began devouring it. However, the shark was not an easy opponent. After all, it was in its own territory. It immediately counterattacked, biting off a chunk of the zombie's arm. They ended up in a draw, and Susan took the opportunity to return to the boat. She quickly informed everyone about the encounter, but it didn't deter them from moving forward. Soon, the group reached their destination. Brian initially planned to drop the two off at the shore and leave. However, the boat malfunctioned at a crucial moment, forcing them to join Peter's party in landing on the island. Brian also fired a distress flare, hoping for assistance. The signal was spotted by the villagers on the island, and one of them hurriedly sought out the doctor, telling him that it seemed like someone had landed on the island. Upon hearing this, the doctor immediately set aside his current tasks and went off to search. He quickly found Peter's group and intended to take them to the quarantine area. On the way, the doctor shared the story of Anne's father. It turned out that they were once friends, planning to research methods to combat the zombie virus together. Unfortunately, Anne's father got infected, yet even in such a state, he refused to leave the island. Instead, he volunteered to become a test subject for the doctor's research. However, before a cure could be developed, he passed away. When he turned into a zombie, the doctor tearfully had to let him go. Soon, they arrived at the quarantine area. However, as soon as they got out of the car, a villager approached the doctor, informing him that something was wrong. To avoid causing panic, the doctor asked them to stay at his house. Little did they know that Menard had already met a gruesome end. Upon reaching their destination, they found no one answering the door. Upon entering the house, they discovered a horrifying scene. Menard lay on the ground, brutally attacked by several zombies. Shocked and frightened, they tried to leave, only to realize they were surrounded by zombies. Peter swung an improvised weapon, knocking down one, and Brian took care of another. They hurriedly fled the room, returned to the car, and sped away. They regretted ever coming to this terrifying island. In the midst of their escape, a zombie suddenly appeared. Brian instinctively swerved, crashing the car into the roadside trees. After inspecting the damage, they found the engine irreparably damaged. With no other choice, they decided to continue on foot. However, Peter's foot was also injured in the car accident, forcing them to rest on the spot. Little did they know that the area was a burial ground for many bodies. Suddenly, a skeletal hand emerged from the ground, grabbing Anne's hair. Before Peter could react, a zombie caught his ankle. Luckily, Brian heard the screams and rushed over. However, Susan, who remained in place, met a gruesome fate, taken away by the zombie. Brian managed to rescue Anne and Peter, but as he turned around, he witnessed a horrifying scene. He fired his gun, but it proved futile against the zombie. Peter grabbed a nearby wooden stick and finally dealt with the threat. Brian, mourning Susan's death, knew they couldn't stay there for long. They hurriedly left, but more zombies emerged from the graveyard. By nightfall, they finally reunited with the doctor at the quarantine area. They shared the news of the resurrected bodies in the graveyard and informed him of Menard's death. However, there was no time for grief because a horde of zombies was slowly approaching. They quickly barricaded the gate and started making Molotov cocktails to fend off the undead. However, when the doctor grabbed a gun, he was unaware that the patients inside had already turned into zombies. He was attacked by a zombie just as he prepared to leave the room. By the time Brian rushed in at the sound of commotion, the doctor was already lifeless. Brian decisively raised his weapon, and a single shot shattered the zombie's head. Meanwhile, the bodies at the quarantine area that hadn't been promptly dealt with began to mutate. A villager, in the process of making Molotov cocktails, was bitten on the arm. A nurse nearby was terrified, nearly collapsing on the spot. Thankfully, Brian arrived in time, dispatching the zombie. He instructed the nurse to take the Molotov cocktails outside for assistance. However, as she left, she was attacked by the mutated villager. With the gate on the verge of being breached, Brian told Anne to retrieve more Molotov cocktails. As she turned around, she nearly collided with a zombie. In the nick of time, Peter shot down the approaching zombie. Meanwhile, the gate was breached by the zombie horde. They quickly threw Molotov cocktails to block the passage and began shooting at the zombies. With limited ammunition and an endless horde, and the quarantine area about to be engulfed in flames, they had no choice but to escape through the back door. However, as they eliminated a few zombies, Brian saw Susan, who had already mutated. Hesitating for a few seconds, he was bitten by his infected girlfriend. Although Peter shot the zombie, Brian had already been infected by the virus. As the quarantine point was consumed by the raging fire, the remaining three immediately left the scene. The next day, they arrived at the malfunctioning small boat. Before long, Brian, affected by the virus, took a turn for the worse. The two others had no choice but to lock him in the cabin, planning to take him back to the city for treatment. However, from the radio, they heard the despairing news. The initial zombie attack on the Coast Guards had led to a widespread outbreak of the zombie virus. The government was helpless, and they could only watch as the city fell into the hands of the undead.